Welcome once more to a very HP Lovecraft Christmas. You knew we were going to arrive here eventually. Those sensitive to gore are big beware, and spoilers, I guess. One of the great friendship stories of all time, Herbert West and Dan Kane. Yeah, it's full of splatter. Yeah, it is extremely macabre and horrifying with its humour, and yes, it is totally vile and vaguely in the tradition of trashy exploitative cinema. However, I like to think we can also admire the creative ingenuity of debut film director Stuart Gordon, proving himself a great talent here, announcing a very fine, imaginative and exciting body of work to come. Able cinematographer Mac Alberg, co-writers, along with Gordon, Dennis Paoli and William J. Norris, the enthusiasm of producer Brian Yasner, music of Richard Band, quoting and replying/building upon Bernard Herrmann's masterly score for Hitchcock's Psycho, Tony Doblin's utterly bewildering and mercilessly shocking mechanical VFX, John Nowland's sickening makeup effects, and really, perhaps most of all, Jeffrey Combs gluing, animating the entire production together as Herbert West, one of the most impressionable and memorable film performances I viewed in my entire life. I viewed Re-Animator at 15, perhaps I ought to have been supervised more, and it was such an exciting film experience. Watching the storyline unravel is a thing to behold. An extremely clever film in its own manner. The screenplay contains some dynamic dialogue, although possibly improvised on set, but also the way the film is constantly utilising its own established possibilities and avenues in order to continue its storyline is just creative dynamite. It is even just little things really, introducing a pet cat, placing Dr. Hill's decapitated head on the paper spike, or each or almost every established character of dialogue eventually has some extreme importance in the plot. We probably expect the Dean to be some sort of periphery background character, or even Dr. Hill, but they become as important to the plot as any of the characters. The film is unrecognizable without their presence in the end. The only instance wherein I think the film substitutes cleverness for convenience in terms of plotting planning is when Dr. Hill escapes from the basement with Herbert's notes and Regent and doesn't kill Herbert. I'm thinking of this now, having watched the film again recently, although maybe Dr. Hill gives some justification for this later on, or they speculate upon... I'm not sure, do not recall. It's a spellbinding film. It's one of those great films which, one of the great champion films of the, that wave of, I guess you could call it post-Evil Dead, or post-John Carpenter's The Thing. I guess you could... Tom Savini's effects on Dawn of the Dead, really. That 1980s wave of the big gore VFX, practical effects films, perhaps culminating in 1992's Peter Jackson's Brain Dead. You Americans may know it as Dead Alive. Re-Animator is one of the apexes of that form, one of the most beloved films of that category. They seem to die out a little bit in the 1990s, and by the 21st century, everyone's more interested in, and certainly it's more... commercially convenient to fund digital VFX rather than the practical VFX. But there was that interesting apex moment in the 1980s, which people will love and consider one of the greatest, it's one of the most beloved eras, that body horror era, if you want. Yeah, it's the body horror era, more or less, right? That's what we refer to it as, essentially. The body horror era, Eraserhead's vaguely important in this regard as well, funnily enough. So that body horror era, that was such an interesting time, I think, and I think the fact that it had an end as well gives it a sense of mysticism and romanticism. There was this kind of bygone era where we were watching these splatter effects, and then within 10-15 years it got to an age where, after Re-Animator's release, even it got to an age where we were just sitting back and admiring the existence of those old films on home video releases, not expecting any new ones to come out, and just relishing that they existed, that we were kind of spoiled by even having 10 classic films of that genre, if you will, and just now hoping for the best for our future in the digital VFX world. It's an interesting thought, I think. Perhaps not.